Cases where your bad feelings signal danger. White pickup truck. Once, I noticed a white pickup truck with 3 men inside following me. At first, I thought it was paranoia, but then I pulled into a gas station, exited from the other side, and saw that they were still following me. Even at that moment, I didn't call the police because people always tell me I overthink things. Instead, I just continued driving in the opposite direction from the city, where I lived until I caught sight of them again out of the corner of my eye at a traffic light. Then I sharply turned into a random neighborhood, made a few random turns, drove around for a bit more, and finally headed home. Dad's heart attack. During a dog walk, I had an unpleasant premonition about my father. He has heart problems and is prone to heart attacks. I called him several times, but he didn't answer, so I rushed home immediately and found him lying near the couch. All signs indicated he was having a heart attack. I called an ambulance and administered first aid while waiting for help. When the doctors arrived, they told me that if I had come home even a minute later, he would have died. A man with a baseball bat. One early morning, a man carrying a baseball bat approached me and started walking alongside me. He struck up a strange conversation, saying that only weirdos were out on the streets at this time of day. Then he dropped a $5 bill on the ground and quietly asked me to pick it up. Feeling threatened, I sped up and got away as quickly as possible. Though I was extremely scared, I didn't pick up the money. A bar with a bad aura. A few years ago, my friends and I went clubbing. We entered one bar, and as soon as I stepped inside, I was overcome with a sense of dread. Every cell in my body screamed, "Get out of here!" After about 20 minutes, I convinced my friends that something was seriously wrong, and we left. The next day, I saw the same club on the news. There had been a shooting outside, and the instigators were inside when we were there, photographing the house. I work as a real estate photographer. Once, I was alone in an empty house taking photos, which is quite normal. However, at some point, I got a very unpleasant feeling, like I wasn't alone. Before starting the shoot, I had already checked the entire house, but the sensation that someone else was there wouldn't go away. It was so strong that I felt chills and became nauseous. I'm not a small person, but at that moment, I felt like a child scared of the dark. To calm myself down, I decided to check all the rooms again, but I still found no one. I was definitely alone in the house. Nevertheless, the feeling that someone was nearby was so intense that after finishing the last room, I literally ran outside. On the street, I felt better, but the anxiety lingered. When I finished photographing the front of the house, the realtor arrived. She asked if the cleaner had done a good job, and I replied that everything seemed fine. Then she and her husband went inside to prepare the house for potential buyers. While I was photographing the backyard, I noticed through the rear window that there was a third person with them. This confused me because they had come together. It turned out that when I arrived, the cleaner was still in the house. She had seen a tall man with tattoos enter the house and panicked, hiding in the pantry. By the time she realized I was just a photographer, it was too late for her to come out since she didn't want to be in an awkward situation. So, she stayed hidden in the pantry the whole time. I'm not sure. Maybe I glimpsed her out of the corner of my eye or smelled her perfume or heard her breathing without realizing it. But my subconscious was screaming that someone was there. This was the most unsettling experience I've ever had while working in similar houses. A friend in danger. Another time, I learned that I had a close friend who was in serious trouble. I had an overwhelming sense of fear and an uncontrollable urge to see him. I was so panicked, it felt like I could hear a clock ticking in my head. A few hours earlier, I had messaged him, and we planned to go to the forest to cut down a Christmas tree. I warned the girl he was with to go back and check on him and also called the police. She had left him alone at home while going to decorate the Christmas tree at her mom's place. I didn't have a car and I'd never been to his house, so I couldn't go there myself. I stayed in touch with her, and when she found him, it was a huge shock. Suspicious customers at McDonald's. When I worked at McDonald's during the night shift, It was around 2 a.m. when I noticed a beat-up Ford Felton with a repainted hood pulling into the parking lot. One guy abruptly got out and began checking the area for cameras and counting the number of people inside. His behavior immediately raised suspicion, but I pretended everything was fine and served him like any regular customer. After they left, I thought maybe they were scared off. Once they were gone, I called the police, reported what happened, and gave them the car's number and description. A few hours later, the police arrived and said they had stopped at Ford and found a kilogram of methamphetamine and several semi-automatic firearms inside. Later, those guys admitted they had been cruising around looking for another pair of acquaintances to rob that same night. An unpleasant date. It was around 9 or 10 p.m. when I was walking home after a terrible date. The distance from the meeting spot to my house was about 10 minutes. I stopped at a crosswalk because the light was red and waited. It was midweek, and there weren't many people on the street. On my way from the meeting spot to the crosswalk, I only encountered one person. Suddenly, I had a very bad feeling. I realized someone was watching me. I turned around and saw a man standing slightly far away. He noticed I was looking at him and began talking about how lovely the summer rain was. I ignored him and kept walking, even though the green light hadn't come on yet. He started walking too. I sped up and so did he. My instincts kicked in: fight, flight, or freeze. And I suddenly stopped, catching him off guard. He took a few more steps before stopping as well. The man asked why I had stopped, and I almost shouted, telling him I didn't want to talk to him, that his behavior scared me, and that he should leave. He argued with me, but I yelled, "Just go away." He slowly walked off, and I stood still, watching him go. The feeling of unease in my stomach only intensified. He stopped at a bus stop near a dark alley and a shadowy parking lot. Standing there, he looked at me and waited for me to approach. I tried calling my friend, but she didn't answer. Then I hid behind some construction materials nearby. On my third attempt, I managed to reach her, but she wasn't home and couldn't help. She asked if anyone else was around, and I replied no. Eventually, I saw a man and two women walking down the street. My friend advised me to stop them and explain the situation. The entire time, that man never stopped staring at me. When I approached the group and asked if I could walk with them, he suddenly started leaving. Turned out he had really been waiting for me. I walked a little with them, but at the next crosswalk, they turned left, while I needed to go right. I thanked them for their help and continued home. We parted ways, and a few seconds later, I saw that man again. I froze, but fortunately, the group noticed him and came running toward me. Seeing them, the creepy guy turned around and left. They escorted me all the way home, and I sincerely thanked them. I am 100% sure he intended to do something awful. I will always be grateful to those three strangers who possibly saved my life. The story of the homeless man. When I was around 12 years old, I lived in downtown Toronto. One evening, I was returning home after swimming practice. I was alone because both my brothers were playing hockey in another part of the city. I was walking calmly when I noticed two guys behind me. They were walking at the same pace as me and commenting on how I was dressed. I started to feel paranoid and decided to check whether they were actually following me or if it was just my imagination. I crossed to the other side of the street, which wasn't well lit, and they followed me. They were indeed following me, and I began to tremble. At that time, there was a serial rapist roaming our neighborhood targeting girls like me, and recently, girls of Eastern European descent had been disappearing. Considering these facts, I fit the profile. Panicking, I started running as fast as I could, darting across roads without looking. I was 12 years old, being chased by adult men, and only 2 blocks from my house. They were getting closer and closer, and I was terrified, trying not to cry as I ran. At the corner where I was supposed to turn onto my street, I felt someone grab my shoulder and then my head. One of them grabbed my hair and started pulling. Before I could scream, a homeless man who usually sat in a tent near the library pounced on the guy grabbing me and started hitting his accomplice. I was extremely frightened and confused, so I just stood there crying. Then the homeless man shouted, "Run, kid! Don't stop!" His words brought me back to reality, and I sprinted home, triple-checking that all the doors and windows were locked. I didn't turn on the lights until my parents returned. We called the police, but all the officers in my area were either corrupt or incompetent. That's why the serial rapist was never caught, and I suspect the police were involved in the kidnapping and trafficking of Eastern European girls, which is why they did nothing. A few days later, my parents and I found the homeless man and gave him some food and supplies as a thank you. We talked a bit and learned that he had been discharged from the Canadian Army and struggled to adapt to civilian life afterward. For about a month, I kept seeing him on the streets, saying hello, sometimes giving him a juice box or some change if I had it. Eventually, my parents tracked down his family in another city, contacted them, and they came to take him home. My parents still keep in touch with him. His life improved slowly. There were many challenges, but now he's doing well. If it weren't for him, I would have definitely been assaulted, if not worse. I'm so grateful he was there for me. After that incident, my parents wouldn't let me go out alone after 6 p.m., and after swimming practice, someone always drove me home, whether it was a relative, a parent of a friend, or a family friend. Thank you for reading. In the comments below, share your own bone-chilling or spine-tingling stories where your bad feelings signaled danger. Don't forget to check out our other videos.